Um, well, first off, I'll start by saying that I hate assessing drama. Um, I don't feel really strongly about it, but I just don't think it's a subject that really should be assessed. Um, I use a lot of rubrics, just simply because it gives that level playing field. Every kid knows what's expected of them to get a particular grade. But most of my assessment is based on my observations in class, peer and self-reflections as well. All of my drama classes do reflective journals, which I find is, when I can get them to do them, is a really effective way of getting them to think about the learning that's going on and the processes that they're going through. So it's not just about assessing that end product of when they're up on stage, because level of talent isn't really something that I'm interested in assessing. It's more the enthusiasm and the preparedness to work together in a team and all that sort of stuff, and that happens more in the build-up to the performance rather than the performance itself. Did that answer the question?
In terms of my assessment process, I really love using rubrics because they create opportunities for kids to be really clear about what it is that you want. And I talked earlier about, in terms of my planning, there are certain things that I want kids to be able to know and to be able to do. And creating a good rubric is about operationalising all of those things. What do I want to see you doing? And so what I started doing a couple of years ago, which was new, because I always used to just use the rubric at the end and sort of go, oh, this is what I'm assessing you on, by the way, and sort of tick, 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 and this is your feedback. And I think that I was starting to question how useful that information was, and whether, those hours that I spent writing things down in little boxes actually made any sense to the kids. And so what I started doing was using it as a way of helping kids to plan their lessons. So today we're going to be looking at this particular convention, which is one of the parts of the rubric. And so let's have a look at what I'm looking at in a top end response, and what I might be looking at in a middle end response. So it was really great for articulating clearly for kids what I want to see. So it wasn't just a surprise, or what I was getting sometimes, which was I'm not a good actor, and that's the reason why I didn't get a good result. It was, no, it's all of these things which are part of the result. I started using it too in terms of ways for kids to self-evaluate and to peer evaluate. So as a part of reflection through the development process, we'd have key stages where I would ask for kids to reflect on the rubric, and I started physicalizing the rubric too. So it was about, okay, so one of the strategies was I'd ask kids to close their eyes and to think about their use of expressive skills in the rehearsal that they'd just done, for example. And I say, so it would be, if your hand is all the way up in there, that's 100%. That's as good as it could possibly be. This was 75%, that's 50, that's 25%, that's not at all. And what I saw kids doing was them closing their eyes, going, oh, there's my hand up in the air. And it was, even though that was a completely arbitrary place where they placed their hand, but there was genuine reflection then on translating what those words were on the page into a reflection of what it was that they were doing right now. And so then they had some sense of where they needed to go in the future. And then I experimented with this thing of, okay, you're standing in front of somebody else and you've just done this reflection on your expressive skills. Now you're reflecting on somebody else's expressive skills in the group. Okay, both of you close your eyes. Okay, thinking about your partner, where did they use their expressive skills? Much harder decision about where I put my hand. Okay, now keep your hand where it is. Now open your eyes at the same time. And kids were looking at where their partner's hand was in the space. It was a bit confronting and challenging, but again, it's just a part of that reflection on their skills. And at the end of the process, to be able to use a document. So we'd have the rubric and we'd sort of done all this work with it. And then to say to kids, okay, now write down where you think your performance is. And I would use the same rubric to do the assessment myself. So then the conversation becomes about what's the difference between where you saw yourself as being on the rubric and where I saw you. What's the gap between those two things? So then the comments down the bottom was really focused feedback about, okay, what did you need to do to get to there? You already knew that we agree on these things. We disagree about this. Why do I disagree with you? And I think it's what I've noticed through trying things like that, and you really using rubrics rather than just imposing rubrics, is that it's really helped kids to be much more reflective. I mean, Hattie uses the term visible learning, but it makes what they're learning much more apparent. Yeah.
The kids, year 7, 8 and 9, they have really clearly defined criteria with rubrics, and they get marked individually, although they work in groups. That I don't. They do in year 9, they do a self-written, self-devised monologue sometime in the first term, but year 7 and 8 work in ensemble groups, so they do very practice-based performances. In year 7 it's Greek theatre or mime in the first semester, and at year 8 it's comedy and then commedia, so they've got a base in some of the historic theatrical styles. They get the criteria, they get a little bit of research information on the different areas, and then they work in their ensemble. Now, the process is always more important than the product, and that's part of the criteria and the rubric. So a lot of your assessment is based on observation, going around and watching the groups. Little signs like they start pretending to talk about the performance they're about to do really loudly and confidently as you walk towards the group. That's a dead giveaway. They've been talking about lunch. But again, I guess that comes with experience. The groups that constantly turn to see where you are generally not focused, and you observe. One of my favourite ways of observing is not even looking at the kids. I sit in the middle of the room, pretend to be on something, whether I'm writing in my Chronicle or on my iPad, and I listen. And it's the process, because some kids will talk to each other, whereas they will not actively discuss things with you in front of the whole class. And then once they've gone through their performance rehearsals and you go around and watch, sometimes again a quiet little sensitive group are much better off with you just peripherally looking at another group but actually watching them, and you will see the dynamics of the group, who is leading it and then may not shine in the actual performance. So you can't mark them on who's the best actor, because really it's the process of creativity that's the most important.
Yeah, I think assessing performance can be really tricky. I think video is your friend. I think it's really good to have some kind of record, and I learnt this the hard way in my very first year of teaching. It was actually when I was teaching English, but someone did an oral presentation and she queried the grade that she had. And it's really hard then to kind of explain without having some substantial evidence, I guess. And so for me, I was like, right, now I'm going to start to record things. It's really easy on your iPhone or your iPad or some kind of recording device, even a little camera. And it means that you can go back to it as well, and you can chart progress, you can chart improvement, which is a really great thing to be able to show the kids in a rubric. I personally think the more detailed the rubric, the less intensive marking you have to do. In other words, the less intensive comments, because it's all in the rubric already. So if it says something like, if they're in one particular bracket and it's already said, this is what you're already doing really well, this is what you need to focus on next to get to the next bracket, it becomes so much easier. You're not having to write out half a page of handwritten comments or typed up comments for each student. If you're in a class of 24 or 28 or whatever it might be, that can get quite time consuming. I always give them criteria so that they know what they're being assessed on. In some units, I'll get them to create their own criteria. What do you want to be assessed on? What do you think I should be marking? Yeah, it's funny how often they'll come up with, oh, how we work as a group, and I haven't said anything, or whether we communicate well, or whether we manage our time. It's quite interesting. But we're very much in terms of formative assessment at our school, and particularly within our curriculum, which we do as drama teachers anyway. So it's all about bite-sized things, and then how does that all fit together in the big scheme of things.
Okay, so from year 9 and 10 level, I don't teach year 9 and 10, but I have. And at year 9 and 10 level, the curriculum is based on, it gets assessed via performance-based tasks, formative assessments and final assessments, plus we have an MYP program at our school. So the middle years program at year 9 and 10 is the baccalaureate program. So we've got certain criteria that they have to be assessed by in year 9 and 10. So it's a holistic approach to learning, where they have to be assessed by certain criteria, which means that they have to keep a workbook, reflect, discuss, perform, write. Like there are certain things that they actually have to do, and there are rubrics that we create based on the MYP criteria that the students get given, and that we have to fill in and assess and comment on. But they do have a process folio, a workbook that they work throughout the year, where they actually have to, apart from having discussions in class, they have set questions that apply to their unit of work that they have to go through and comment on. They have to mark their process in their journals. That's at 9 and 10 level. 11 and 12 is different because it's VCE. So it's VICA prescribes certain things, and I follow obviously the assessment guidelines of VICA, and I use their suggestions for outcomes and assessment, and we have to do percentage-wise, we have to do what VICA does. But I write my own assessment, my SACs, my school assessed, I write them. So I write them based on the criteria that VICA provides, the key learning skills and content knowledge criteria, and I also write them based on whatever production we've gone to see, or things that I think are most relevant about what we're studying in that unit of work. I pick out the things that I think are most relevant in a particular production that we're studying that I think might be relevant at the end of year exam. So I try and I'm not speaking clearly. I try and what's the word? I try and, so I'm not doing well. This is not how I speak to my kids. I do sometimes actually. I try and make sure that everything that is on the SAC is relevant to them, and not just, so that I'm not just spitting out what VICA has told me to do, so that I'm actually asking them questions about the play that we've seen, or the play that they've just put on, or the process they've just been through. Plus I'm very intent on a folio. So my kids, my year 12s, and always have a production folio, and I audit it. So there's strict rules about what goes in the folio, contents, and they absolutely, like, there's always research and dramaturgy and lots and lots of background material that goes into their folio, and it can't just be wiki cut and pasted. It's got to be things that they've found from various places, books, libraries, internet, reading, interviews, like all sorts of things. Background on playwrights, those sorts of things. I make sure that that's very in depth always. We always go through a process of annotating scripts in our folios and marking beats and doing all sorts of text-based things that I think are the key to everything, really. Like, I think if you don't look at the text that they're studying in something like theatre studies, then you're not doing the right thing. Like, I feel like everything sort of comes from the text. So we start with the text, and we just analyse it and look at it and mark it and pick it apart and talk about it and workshop it, and I get them to do lots of activities. There are things in their folios where they have to write down all of the things that just their character says, and then they've got to write down all the things that the other characters say just before them. Then they've got to write down all the things that are said about them by other characters when they're not there. So, which gives them a really interesting insight and through line through their character. And I find that those sorts of activities and making them do that sort of stuff in their folio and in their own time sometimes, like often that's homework, makes them feel really connected to the work, and it makes them feel really connected to the text and the character, and they come to school feeling like they're working really hard and they're doing really important work. So the folio is massive for me, and getting them to hand it in regularly, so having dates and audits and interviews and times where I actually sit individually with students in tutorials and I go through their folio and I tell them what's missing, and I thoroughly annotate their folios and I show them where I feel like they're missing things and where I feel like they're not getting the best out of something, or if I've asked them to do a specific task for homework, like I've given them questions about a rehearsal or about a technique that we used in rehearsal, and I've given them questions and they've taken it home and not done it properly, I get them to redo it. So the folio is a process folio, and nothing's a mistake in the folio, and I say that there are only happy mistakes. So the mistakes just you make, even if you make a mistake, it's just that just leads you to the next great thing that you're going to do. So folios end up really important and huge, and the kids are really proud of them. And they use them to prepare for their SACs and their exams and all of their stuff, because it's got all their stuff in it. So that's my major in 11 and 12. That's my major form of assessment, is their folio, and obviously their SACs, because we have like a certain number of SACs that we have to mark and grade, and their performance in Year 12 is not just based on their performance, it's based on their folio and their stagecraft areas and their production process and their collaboration and their teamwork, which is all marked in their folio for me. So I watch them do all of that work, and I mark them along the way and audit them along the way throughout the rehearsal process on both their stagecraft areas, but it's all in a folio. So they literally have to put everything in that folio. So that becomes their evidence.
For VCE, it's really, really important that the kids know, and for Year 10 as well, so 10, 11 and 12, it's really important that those kids know exactly what it is that they are being graded on. Because you can't say to someone, I want you to go and do a performance about a tree, and then grade them on all this criteria that you didn't tell them about. It's unfair. And they're not going to learn what you want them to learn unless you specifically tell them what it is that you're doing it for. To that extent, I have created a rubric from the skills and knowledge the kids are supposed to be displaying in VCE from the study design. So I just went straight from the study design, copied it out, wrote it down, and I said, right, this is Year 12 standard. I wanted it to be something that I could give the kids beforehand for a couple of reasons. One, they need to know what it is that they're doing. Two, I don't want them to have any excuses. I don't want them to get to the end and say, why did I only get this grade? And me have to be able to justify my choices. And I didn't want them throughout the time to say, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, you do, because it's right there in the rubric. And in other subjects, it's really easy to do that because, and in the written one, in the analysis of either themselves or a professional production, if you just say it needs to have analysis, for my kids at my school, that's not enough because they don't know what analysis is. So I really broke it down and I stepped it out and I said, to analyse the actor and the character they're portraying, you need to blah. And if you want to get Year 12 standard, you need to do this. And if you are in the Year 10 standard, it would look like this. And I took it all the way down to Year 7. And I ended up having a continuum from Year 7 to 12 about the skills that are required in the Year 12 drama study design. So for all 4 outcomes for Year 12. But that was my Year 11 class. So yeah, so they had a rubric that had their standard plus up one for Year 12 if they wanted to aim for that, and then all the standards below. So when they're a bit lazy and they didn't answer the question properly, I could say, well, you're in the Year 8 standard. You're in Year 11, you're in the Year 8 standard because you didn't do this. And they had no excuses because they had it before they did their task and they had it before we saw the play. I did the same with performance, but that was really hard because you can watch a performance and you know that is Year 11 standard, and I can tell you it's Year 11 standard because of this. And I can tell you what you need to do better in order to make it Year 12 standard. But if you haven't seen that particular performance, if you just want a generic example of what expressive skills look like at a Year 11 standard, that's really hard. So what I did was I got another drama teacher at my school, and we do PLT time, professional learning teams, every KLD meeting that we have, so every faculty meeting that we have. And I said, right, we're working on this because that's what I need. She's way more experienced than me, so she kind of had to help me. And we figured out the wording of what all of the criteria were for the performance and what it would look like. Then we added in, and because we did it from Year 7 to Year 12, and we added in a criteria of working in teams because that's what we, or teamwork, that's what we look at from 7, 8, 9 and 10 as well. And we worded some criteria differently because the study design has it worded like this, but really we can break that up into 2 parts or we can mush them together or something. So we came up with this rubric that says very clearly what it is you need to do in order to achieve the standard. Of course, next year I'm teaching theatre studies, not drama, so I have to do it all again. But anyway, that rubric is awesome to give to 11s and 12s, and I can give it to them and I can say, look, this is what I'm grading you on, this is where you need to get. Year 11s, you could, look how easy it is to get to Year 12 standard. All you have to do is this one little bit extra. But with Year 7s, they don't need to see this whole rubric. They don't need to get a rubric criteria performance tick mark when they do their little mini performance on something they've worked on 2 lessons for. I find that with Year 7s, especially because I know my essential skills for them, I want them to learn their expressive skills and try them out. They don't even need to be good at them, they just need to give it a go. And I want them to participate and be comfortable performing in front of their class. At our school, Year 7s stay in their form group, so if they're not comfortable in their class, who they spend every single day with for the whole year, then there's something wrong. So with that in mind, my assessment of them and the feedback that I give them can just be the conversation we have after their performance. And I always ask other members of the class, it might be, give me one thing you liked and was there anything you didn't understand type thing. And everyone always has 10 billion things that they liked, and it's often hard to get the kids to have constructive criticism. But that's okay, because that's when I can say, I didn't quite understand this part. And that works really well with the Year 7s. The Year 8s and 9s, that's what I do up until their final performance, their major performance, when they do get a rubric back from me that just has below standard, at standard and above standard. And then I give them individual feedback as well on how they could improve a little bit further, or if I'm really proud of them because they did something that I didn't think they could or something like that. Not that I would ever tell them I didn't think they could do something. But Year 10s, 11s and 12s, I like to be right in their face with, this is your rubric, this is what I'm going to be marking you on. This is, in my opinion, what VCAL will be marking the Year 12s on. So this is what you're aiming for. So I suppose I like rubrics a lot.